Okay, so urinary system today, we're going to get right to it. And again, on Thursday, we'll do reproductive, finish up Unit 9, and go through the Unit 9 portfolio. All right, so chapter 25 is the urinary system in open stacks. The primary organ of the urinary system is going to be the kidneys. Everything else associated with the urinary system is technically like an accessory organ. So we definitely think of the kidneys as being the primary organ or the principal organ of the urinary system. The basic function of the urinary system is to maintain fluid balance. So along with the lymphatic system, along with the cardiovascular system, the kidneys are going to help us to maintain our fluid balance. So if we have excess amounts of fluid, the kidneys are going to work to eliminate some of that fluid. If we don't have enough fluid, if we're dehydrated, the kidneys will work to retain fluids or retain water specifically. So there's that going on. The kidneys also are in charge of some of the major filtration of plasma of our blood. So we're going to see a lot of blood heading into the kidneys. We're going to not then, therefore, we'll see capillary networks abound, right? We're going to see exchanges going on. And remember, if there's one thing about cardiovascular that you want to take away this semester, particularly with the vascular system, is that capillaries are where anything is going to get dropped off or picked up. So when we're talking about filtration and kind of cleaning blood or absorbing nutrients or assimilating nutrients, when we're talking about gases being exchanged in the lungs, we're talking about capillary networks. So that's been kind of the overriding theme this unit. We started at respiratory and saw again that major capillary grouping around those alveoli where we see gas exchange take place. And then we looked at the digestive system last time we were together and saw the exchange of nutrients going on in the small intestines and again, a high volume of capillaries. And now here we are, we've made it to the urinary system. And again, we're going to see a high degree of capillary going on with the kidneys. So as we go through and look at some of the basics of the urinary system, we're going to take the macro or what we would call the gross aspect of anatomy, and after that, it's pretty straightforward, right? There are basically four things, and that's it with the urinary system. So that's kind of nice. There are only four macro structures that you guys need to be aware of. Now, when we get into the microstructures, the small anatomy, microanatomy of the kidneys, there'll be a few more terms, so a few more structures. But we're not there yet. We'll get there in a few minutes. For now, though, we just want to look at the four macro structures of the urinary system. And again, we start with the kidneys. Those are the two, you have a left and a right kidney, and you are certainly able to function with just one. And actually, we can function with neither kidney working, but we would need what's called dialysis in order for our blood to be filtered and our fluid to be maintained, our fluid balance to be maintained. So kidneys, you can live with just one. You can in fact live with neither of them working, but ideally we're going to have two functional kidneys. So as we filter blood and basically form urine, we're going to have to get rid of that urine. So we do see a major tube that leaves each of the kidneys. So you're going to have a right and left ureter. Okay, you have a right ureter and a left ureter. These are the long tubes that are going to deliver urine from the kidneys down to the urinary bladder. Okay, so kidney first, ureter second, urinary bladder third. Okay, so you're going to have two kidneys, two ureters, all delivering urine to one spot, and that's the urinary bladder. And then as we leave the urinary bladder, we're going to pass through what we call the urethra. Okay, so that's your fourth structure of the urinary system: kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. Okay, so this is considered, as we leave the kidney and enter into the ureter, we now begin what's called the urinary tract. So there's that TRACT, right? There's that term tract again. We've seen respiratory tract, digestive tract, now urinary tract. So we can assume there are probably going to be some tubes involved. We're probably going to see some epithelial lining, some connective tissue, smooth muscle underneath that, and then back to connective and epithelial. So anyhow, that's what's going on with the macro structures. Pretty straightforward. We do also see the adrenal glands sitting on top, kind of like little caps on the superior aspect of each kidney. So we saw adrenal glands back when we were doing the endocrine system several weeks ago. So anyhow, the other thing I wanted to mention too on this slide is we see a lot of red and blue. So if the kidney's role, the main role, is to filter blood and to kind of balance and regulate the fluid and the plasma of our blood, then certainly we need to have a way to deliver the blood to the kidney. So that's what we see here. We see that abdominal aorta, that kind of that descending aorta, it's also called. And then we have two large arteries that branch off of that main conducting artery, and those are called renal arteries. So pretty straightforward. We've seen them before when you did your vascular charts. Renal artery and then renal vein were both in there. So yeah, not bad. When we enter into the kidney, however, we're going to see that renal artery branch into smaller and smaller arteries, ultimately dumping into arterial and capillary networks. So we're going to name those vessels coming up here in just a few minutes. Location wise, we do generally, both kidneys are the same size. They're not much different as far as that goes. The size difference is negligible. There really shouldn't be much of any difference. And if there is, it's again going to be very slight. However, we do see that the left kidney is a little higher, a little more superior than the right kidney. You can kind of see that there. The 12th, remember too, going back to our skeletal system, we saw that the 11th and 12th rib pairs are what we called floating ribs. And notice they don't wrap all the way around and connect with any kind of cartilage. So those are floating ribs. The right kidney generally is going to come right underneath that 12th rib, whereas the left kidney, we do see a little bit of the 11th rib and certainly the 12th rib going over the superior aspect. Okay. The kidneys are what we consider to be, so looking at the next, so we're going to move on from this top image and look at letter C, illustration. We have what we call a transverse section or a horizontal section or a cross section. We're looking at kind of a bird's eye view down into the abdominal area. And what we see is this peritoneum. Remember the mesentery and the omentum and that peritoneum that we saw last week with the digestive system. With the kidneys, we do see them being outside of and even kind of behind that peritoneal cavity. So, or that peritoneal area. So we do say that the kidneys are retroperitoneal. Okay, so they're going to be, what that means is they're a little less protected by those layers of the peritoneum. So what we have to do and to give them some protection is put them in a fatty capsule. So your kidneys are going to be kind of protected and insulated and contained in a fatty capsule. So kind of nice. Let's see what else. Oh, you see some of our back muscles as well. But yeah, retroperitoneal is the name of the game for kidney location. And again, we see a fat capsule surrounding each of the kidneys. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's look, we're still not quite at the micro scale, but we are going to do a frontal or coronal section and remove a portion of the kidney so we can look inside of it. What we do notice certainly is the ureter, and the ureter is coming out of an area that is called the hilum. And we've seen this term before. We saw it with the lungs, we saw it with the spleen, we also saw it with the I don't know, we saw it with something else too. Oh, a lymph node. Okay, has a hilum. Okay, so a hilum or a or hilus, the plural. A hilum is an area where we see blood vessels and potentially other tubes entering or leaving an organ. So again, we don't have a bunch of tubes coming in to multiple locations. We have one primary entry and exit point, and that's called the hilum. All right. So we would also then see the renal artery coming in and the renal vein going out at this hilum area. Okay, so let's work our way. We'll end at the hilum. So we're going to start at the hilum. We're going to end at the hilum. So our next stop is actually going to be looking at kind of the layers of the kidney itself. And we see similar terminology again that we've seen before. Probably the first time we saw it was maybe with the adrenal glands, talking about the cortex being kind of that outer shell of an organ, and the medulla being more that inner meat portion of the organ. So the cortex of the kidney is going to be this outer, more superficial area. Okay. We do see some vascularization. In fact, these little archway vessels are going to be delivering, it's almost the last stop of delivering blood. So right up in this area is where we're going to see the primary kind of capillary networks of the kidneys in that cortex. Now, we also then see the deeper section, the medulla or the medullary region, is going to possess, I think, what jumps out at, what jumps out at me and probably you too, is we do see triangles or pyramids. So each of these little triangles are called renal pyramids. They also call them medullary pyramids, which you can see here. Yeah, these are the renal pyramids. So it's kind of the first stop for urine formation is going to be in these renal pyramids. So as blood's coming in and we're filtering some of that plasma and creating urine, we're collecting it initially in these renal pyramids. And then we're going to see each of these pyramids kind of tapers off and dumps into what we call a minor calyx. This is the plural, so it's pointing to two different ones. So that's why it says calyces. One is a calyx. You would see the CES get dropped and an X on there. So CALYX is the singular. So this is a calyx. These are calyces. All right. So anyhow, the first little sections of the so if we have minor calyces, we must have major calyces. Otherwise, they just call them calyx or calyces. So we do see each of these pyramids dumping into a minor calyx, and then these minor calyces all kind of taper together and form what we call the major calyces. Okay, so minor calyx, major calyx. And then finally, we're going to dump all of that urine into what we call the renal pelvis. So really the renal pelvis is the last area inside of the kidney where urine is going to be collected. Okay, and once we've got the urine collected in the renal pelvis, then we're going to see it leave through the hilum and enter into the ureter. Okay, so cortex, medulla. Okay, that shouldn't be anything that new for you. Within the medulla, we're going to see kind of the order in which urine is formed. We're going to see the renal pyramids into the minor calyces, then the major calyces, and finally the renal pelvis. So I think knowing that order is probably a good idea. Pyramid, minor calyces, major calyces into the renal pelvis. All right. Let's see. A couple other things we kind of noticed too. These are called renal columns. So in between each of these pyramids, we do see columns. So it's like we're on an archaeology expedition over in Greece or Egypt. We've got pyramids in Egypt and columns in Greece. So, but anyway, so that's what we kind of see going on here. Okay. And this is an actual kidney. So again, you can see these pyramids are pretty evident, as well as these columns. And then we can see that big renal pelvis there. And then the major calyx, and then a couple minor calyces coming off of the pyramids. Okay, so this is basically the black and white of everything we got them going through. Again, there's a cortex and a medulla, the outer and inner regions. We've got the medullary pyramids, or the renal pyramids, and then the columns in between each pyramid. And then a calyx means cup. So we've got little cups that are minor cups, and then major cups, and then finally dumping into that renal pelvis. Hey, now vascularization wise, we have to go a little bit further than just the renal artery. We know that the kidneys must be highly vascularized if their whole function is basically to regulate blood and plasma of blood, and help to filter some of the gunk that might be in there, or even some of the excess gases, and what we call nitrogenous waste, like ammonia and urea, uric acid. These are nitrogenous wastes that the body's getting rid of. 95% of urine is going to be water. So most of your urine is water. And again, that other 5% is going to be mainly nitrogenous waste. We shouldn't see what we call plasma proteins, right? Like we shouldn't see albumin or fibrinogen or immunoglobulins. We shouldn't see any of that in your urine. They're too large to pass out of the plasma and into the, we'll talk about what it's called, but into what will ultimately be your urine. So we shouldn't see red blood cells. We shouldn't see plasma proteins. There are certain things we shouldn't see in urine. We shouldn't see glucose in your urine either. So anyhow, highly vascularized, we know this. So renal artery is going to come in, and then it's again a large branch off of the abdominal aorta, and then we're going to travel through. There's more to it than just interlobular and afferent arterioles. We're going to add a few more, but I did want to mention these two because they're basically the first kind of one big artery heading into the kidneys. And then these last two bullets are kind of the end of the line before we enter into the capillary networks. So the interlobular arteries, very tiny arteries, almost arterial level. These interlobular arteries are going to be dumping blood into the afferent arterioles. So again, it's a lot right now. So I'm going to pull up a slide. I'll show you kind of the order of blood flow. Before we do that, this is the first time really I think we're seeing this term nephron. A nephron is a functional unit within the kidney. So the nephron is the micro unit where all of this blood is going. So part of the nephron is going to be a capillary network, and it's going to have a name, but I did want to mention that. These are the microscopic functional units, nephrons. So all this blood is heading to a nephron. All right, nepher means kidney or has something to do with the kidneys. So let's take a peek at, let me get my pointer on real quick here. Let's take a peek at how that blood is coming in. So we see the renal artery enters in through that through the hilum, and we see a couple of branches called segmental arteries. So and the venous aspect is the exact same, just in reverse. So if we have a segmental artery, we're going to have its associated segmental vein. So you can see they're neighboring with one another. Again, red is your artery, blue is your vein. Okay, so anyway, segmental arteries. So the renal artery goes off into segments. Okay. And then each of those segments is going to branch into what we call lobar. So we're going to segment off of the renal artery and then go a little bit further into specific lobes. So what we call the lobar arteries. And then the lobar arteries are going to branch even further and go in between these renal pyramids or lobes. So we call these interlobar. Okay, interlobar arteries. And then we get all the way up to the arch of the pyramid. And we call that the arch arteries or the arcuate arteries. Okay. And then these arcuate arteries, you can see then, are going to branch off into what we call interlobular. Remember, lobar means big lobe. Lobular means little lobes. So anyway, these interlobular arteries are then going to dump into an arteriole that will lead us to the nephron or the capillary network. Okay. Lot of blood supply, and therefore a lot of millions of little nephrons or capillary networks. So we're going to see tons and tons of branches. So this one big artery that comes in is going to distribute to millions of nephrons in the kidneys. So anyway, that's why you see so many different branches or segments. So we have the segmental, and then the lobar, interlobar, and then the arcuate going up over the arch, and then finally the little lobes, the interlobulars. Okay. So we're going to leave the kidneys for just a few minutes and go through, travel briefly through the urinary tract. The first section, again, is the ureter, and all of that ureter urine is going to dump into the urinary bladder. And again, the urinary bladder, it's going to have epithelium and connective and then smooth muscle. It's primarily going to be smooth muscle tissue. There's not a lot in the way of epithelium. We do know we have an unusual type of epithelium within the urinary tract, and we call it transitional. So you'll remember all the way back in the epithelium tissue or the tissue section and epithelial tissue in particular, we had that oddball group called transitional epithelium, and that just means it changes in its thickness as urine fills up the balloon. The thickness of the epithelial lining is going to thin out as the bladder distends or empties, I should say. As the bladder empties, we're going to see the layers get thicker. So they transition or change. So anyway, that's the epithelium of the urinary bladder. And it can distend or stretch considerably. We know that it can fill quite a bit of urine. The urge to urinate comes from that bladder stretching. The bladder's the connective tissue between the epithelium and the smooth muscle, and as well as the smooth muscle, is going to be full of nerves. So there are several different plexuses throughout, and as the bladder distends, the nerves are going to get triggered to send you a signal that it's time to go potty. So that's kind of what's going on with the bladder. So it's basically a storage unit. There's not a lot of anything else really going on in the urinary bladder that we know of. There's some, again, there's some good bacteria or good resident flora in there as well. And if we do get a bacterial infection, typically then we would see maybe the urinary bladder having some inflammation with it. So anyway, male versus female, couple of items. The kidneys, maybe a male kidney's a little bigger, but for the most part, it has more to do with body size and body type. So, an extremely small man and an extremely large woman, the extremely large woman may have larger kidneys than the extremely small man. So it's difficult to say, oh, men have bigger kidneys than women. That probably isn't necessarily the case all the way through. So generally, the kidneys are roughly the same size. The ureter that goes from the kidney to the bladder, again, maybe slightly longer in someone who's taller. So can't necessarily say men have longer ureters than women. Okay. Again, a very tall woman would probably have a longer ureter than a very short man. So, so again, no real big generalizations there. Now, the position, the urinary bladder, the position is a little bit different. So that may be something that you first kind of notice, with the female on the left and the male on the right. We do see something that we'll see more of on Thursday, and that's the uterus. So the urinary bladder is maybe slightly smaller in a female, mainly due to the presence of the uterus. So, and oh yeah, and if you put a baby in the uterus, there's a lot of extra weight and pressure. So pregnant women definitely will tell you that the urge to urinate is greater than when they're not pregnant. So, and you can see why. Baby is sitting on their bladder. All right. So again, not a heck of a lot of difference in the bladder construction between a male and a female. Just some differences again in this positioning of the presence of the uterus, and then the position between the rectum and the bladder. So over in the male, the rectum and the bladder are closer together. Now, the last stop of the urinary tract system, or the urinary tract, is going to be the urethra. So as we leave the urinary bladder, we're going to enter into the urethra. That urethra is definitely different between a male and a female. One of the first things we notice certainly is going to be the length of the urethra. So from the exit of the bladder to the exit of the body, what we call the urethral orifice, or just the hole, your pee hole, is very short. You see maybe 6 centimeters, at the most. They're talking about maybe a couple of inches. Okay. When we come over to the male, we can see there's quite a bit more distance for that urethra. Now, we also do see with males, and we'll look at this in a little more detail on Thursday, is the presence of a prostate gland. Okay, the prostate gland does not exist with the female, but does exist with the male. And prostate, we'll see, does a few things with the reproductive tract. We'll see that on Thursday, but we do know that there's a little bit more control of urine when the prostate is operational. So if the prostate is enlarged, it actually can cause urine, what we call urination. It can make urinating more difficult. So they say it's more of like a spurt of urine. So it's like stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. That's instead of just going pee, you just go to the bathroom and and then you pee and pee and pee, and then you're done, right? And you leave. With prostate issues, it's not quite as cut and dry as going in, peeing, done, walk out. It's pee a little bit, pee a little bit more, pee a little bit more, so That's something you want to pay attention to when your male clients that are or male patients that are older are coming in and saying, hey, how you doing? Why, oh, I'm fine. Yeah, just here for a physical. Work, makes me take a physical. I don't really want to be here. I don't really like the doctor. Oh, well, that's fine. I understand. We just have to ask you a couple questions and da 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 da. And in that intake, you might get some information that they maybe didn't think was a big deal. For you, it is a big deal, being the healthcare expert that you guys will be. And when the gentleman says, oh, well, when I go pee, it's kind of just, it's not a steady stream. I'll put it that way. It doesn't really hurt. It's not painful. It's just not a steady stream. I don't know if that's a big deal. And if he's basically over the age of 35 or 40, it's definitely something that could be a big deal. So you're going to take note of that in your chart. And a steady stream of urine is normal, spurting urine abnormal, and it typically relates to the prostate. All right. So anyway, the other thing too, about this little pit stop that we're making here as we kind of blend the reproductive and urinary systems together, that short distance for the entrance into the bladder from the outside world, that can lend to more of an opportunity for bacterial infections. So women or females, I should say women, females tend to have more UTIs or bladder infections than males. Okay, doesn't mean males don't get bladder infections or urinary tract infections. Usually, if there is a UTI, the bacteria culprit, the bad guy, is usually E. coli. So, I mean, it could be other bacteria issues down, but typically down in this area, if there is a bladder infection or a UTI, it's likely going to be an E. coli infection. And E. coli is naturally residing in the colon, colon. Okay, so E. coli resides in the colon under normal conditions. It does not reside in the urinary tract under any condition unless we have bad hygiene or other slip ups. So we want to make sure that fecal matter doesn't get anywhere really near either of these spots. Okay, so if you have daughters, or if you're a female, when you were young, you were told you definitely want to wipe from front to back, because if you're wiping from back to front, you could be bringing poop toward your reproductive and urinary systems. Not a good idea. So you want to go back. Okay? You don't want E. coli in those areas. Okay, so UTIs oftentimes caused by hygiene and other issues related to E. coli from the colon. Oh, another thing too, if some of our patients have severe and extreme constipation. So we've had patients come in that have chronic UTIs and their hygiene is fine. Their other aspects of their lives that relate to those areas are fine. So why do they keep getting E. coli infections, maybe in the bladder, or even higher up into the ureters? Males too, it certainly can happen. Why do we get UTIs that may be chronic? Well, chronic constipation. So if a patient hasn't had very good bowel movements or any bowel movements for a week, two, if it's gone a long period of time and they're not pooping, we may have some fecal impaction that would cause an increase in E. coli. That E. coli could actually leach out of these areas and end up in the urinary tract. So it's not the infection is not always external. There could be some internal issues going on as well. So anyway, wonderful talk on a Tuesday morning. I know. Well, we're in the afternoon now, so I guess it's okay to talk about this stuff. Thursday's birds and the bees, so you guys better be prepared. Okay, reproductive system on Thursday. Here's a look at the bladder. We see again we've got kind of some rugae or folds. We see we've got that transitional epithelium, a little bit of a connective tissue deal, and then all of that red kind of color is going to be indicative of muscle. So we do see smooth muscle, and then again more connective and epithelium. We called that the peritoneum, just like we saw. This is the same peritoneum that's in the abdominal cavity. Okay, so that's the parietal peritoneum. And you can see the ureter coming right in, and a little kind of a hole there, a little opening for the ureter to dump into the bladder. When we look at the epithelium of this, could be a ureter. We can see that again, it's very thick, it's empty. There's the lumen here, the opening that the urine's going to pass through. The fact that the lumen is so small would be an indicator that there's no urine currently passing through. We just have some extremely thick stratified squamous epithelium that will still be stratified, maybe even a little more stratified cuboidal at this point in some areas. As it stretches out, as urine's passing through, we may see flatter cells and less strata. Urethra, again, mucous membrane lined epithelium. It's going to leave. So females, only 3 centimeters long. I think I said it can get up to 6. We have 3 to 6 centimeters long. So you're talking like 1 to 2 inches long. Males up to 20 centimeters long. Okay. And it's, I think, like about roughly 2.5 centimeters per inch. So this would be probably about 8 to 10 inches. Okay, micturition. Micturition is a fancy word for urine production. Okay, so as we're producing urine and dumping it into the bladder, micturition contractions are going to occur, and then we're going to eliminate the urine. Okay, so micturition involves urine production, urine collection, and then urine elimination. Okay. And you have a couple little sphincters in the bladder that are going to enable us to kind of have some control over urinating. Okay, so right as we leave the bladder to go into the urethra, there's a little sphincter, kind of like an inner sphincter, and then there's more of an kind of an internal sphincter, and then more of an external sphincter. So that internal sphincter is what's going to relax first to then continue the process of releasing of urinating. Okay. All right, so that's that. Now we're just about done. So the big scale stuff is done. Kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. Pretty straightforward. We looked at the kind of the gross anatomy of the kidney from an inside perspective, right? We did a frontal cut or a coronal cut to expose what's inside of the kidney. So now we're going to go a little bit further and look at that small functional unit called a nephron. So as the blood has gone from that renal artery and segmented and gone up through the lobes and arched up, and then finally made it out of the interlobular blood and into what we call an afferent arteriole, that's where the nephron begins. So we're going to see what we call a capsular or corpuscular region, and then we're going to see what we call a tubular region. So the first thing we're going to see is basically where all of that blood is going. So we're going to look at the capillary network first. We're going to see an afferent arteriole coming in. Now we're at the nephron. Okay, and this first little section of the nephron is primarily the capillary bed surrounded by a kind of a little capsule. Okay, so that's the corpuscular or capsular aspect. The rest of that nephron is going to be a bunch of tubes that are basically we're creating urine or collecting urine. So, anyway, each nephron is made up of two regions, the corpuscle and the tubule. Okay. The corpuscle has two parts to it. That's it. So the corpuscle has two sections. One section is going to be that capillary bed. Again, the whole point of the nephron is the nephrons are kind of like the alveoli. This is the end of the line for that blood that's coming from the heart and going out to the lungs. Okay, the capillary network of the alveoli, that's where the action takes place. So the nephron is in essence like the alveoli of the lungs. Okay, this is where all that blood coming from the renal artery is all going to head to the nephron. And the first stop is then going to be the capillary bed, and we call it the glomerulus. So you've maybe heard this term before. If you've taken A&P before, or maybe a biology class, you might have heard that term. But for most of us, this is a new term likely. The glomerulus, this is the capillary network of the nephron. This is where all the blood's going. Okay. The glomerulus is going to be tucked in a capsule we call the glomerular capsule or Bowman capsule. A glomerular capsule or Bowman's capsule. Okay, those are the two parts of the corpuscle. So the very beginning is we're going to dump blood into a capillary network called a glomerulus, and that glomerulus is going to be surrounded by kind of a capsule that's going to be a little bit tubular in and of itself, but it's not quite, it's kind of the end of a tube forming a capsule bubble. Okay, and inside of that bubble is going to be the blood. Okay. So the Bowman's capsule is going to have little feet or little pedicels. That just means little feet. Okay. So let me pull up. Here it is. So I'll go back to those in just a second. So this is kind of where we're sticking with the rest of our little discussion today. Is this slide pretty much gives you the overview visually of what I'm talking about. I mean, I could have black and white up there and talk about it all day, and it's not going to make sense. So I'm going to pull this slide up so we can really make sense of what's going on. So we have the renal artery down here, and again, it winds through, breaks off segments, and then we get to this interlobular artery. And then we're going to get a branch off of that interlobular artery called the afferent arteriole. So the first kind of blood delivery vessel that goes into the glomerulus is called an afferent with an A arteriole. And we know it's an arteriole, right? Because arterioles always dump into a capillary. So if we know the glomerulus is a capillary bed, we know that that what is bringing the blood into that capillary bed is going to be called an arteriole. All right, so this one's called an afferent arteriole. That's different. Up to this point, we've really just seen arteriole goes in, dumps blood, venule goes out away from the capillary bed. With the nephron system, it's slightly different. And again, next semester, we spend almost 2 weeks on urinary physiology. So I really am, I just want to introduce you to the very basics of a nephron, because we spend a whole bunch of time here next semester talking about how do we get fluid out of the blood? How do we get fluid back into the blood? How do we get hydrogen ions? How do we get sodium chloride ions out of the blood, into the blood? How do we get, how does all of this happen? How do we filter blood? How do we secrete? How do we reabsorb? How does a nephron work? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and probably already said too much about the function of a nephron. But I think the key is that you know these specific spots, specific anatomy. So the afferent arteriole comes in and then becomes the capillary network, the glomerulus. Okay, and then we're going to see a vessel leave the glomerulus, because if blood goes in, it's got to come out. So we see then the efferent arteriole. we've seen these terms before, right? Afferent nervous system pathway, okay, brings sensory into the central nervous system. Efferent pathway takes the motor signal out. So afferent goes in, efferent goes out. So we see that same principle here. We saw it with a lymph node, even afferent lymph vessel coming into the node, efferent vessel going away from the node. So afferent always goes in, efferent always goes away. So that's what we see here. That efferent arteriole does branch. We see a branch coming down here into what we call the peri, meaning around, tubular capillaries. So we have a second capillary network with and around concerning the nephron. So the nephron has two capillary networks that it's dealing with. The first capillary network is called the glomerulus. This is the first stop in urine formation. Okay, so that glomerulus, notice, is surrounded by the Bowman's or glomerular capsule. Okay, so within that, so there's a little bit of action going on. We've got some blood pressure kind of pushing in. We've got what we call osmotic pressure, what they call hydrostatic pressure. So we've got these pressures of fluid going on. So that's what we get more into next semester. So I don't want you to get too wound up about some of the functional or physiological aspects. Okay, just know that first stop, glomerulus, surrounded by the Bowman's capsule. That's the first point of the nephron. That's the first spot where we're going to start forming urine. Okay. This area right here, the only thing you need to know about function for right now is the term filtration. And I've used that term several times. It's one of the main things the kidneys do is filtration of blood, but this is where specifically filtration is occurring. And when we look next semester, we start the semester off with discussing kind of like cell transport mechanisms, like how does diffusion work? How does osmosis work? How does active transport work? How does filtration work? So we'll see more specifically what I'm talking about regarding filtration next semester, almost pretty much right off the bat. That's really where we start our physiology adventure next spring, is dealing with what are the basics of movement of particles or movement of fluid. What are the most basic principles of movement? So one of them is filtration. So that's what's going on at the first stop, filtration. So we're filtering some stuff out of the bloodstream. We're going to dump some plasma over in here into the glomerular capsule or the Bowman's capsule. And with that plasma is going to come some sodium and, some other items potentially. Okay. So that's step one, spot one, location one of the nephron. Okay, we call it the corpuscular region. Okay, but it's really just the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. You need to know those. Okay, that's the first stop in a nephron. Okay, so notice the blood aspect, it stays contained in the blood vessel. We see that efferent arteriole leaving, and then one branch of it is going to kind of come up and around and connect back up with what we would consider to be like the interlobular vein, heading finally ultimately to the renal vein. So some of this blood is just going to leave that glomerulus and come right up over and attach with the venule that's leaving, okay, or the vein that's leaving. The other branch of that efferent arteriole, again, is going to form another capillary network. So we call this the peritubular capillaries. Now, the fact that there's a capillary network there should immediately trigger your brain to say, oh, then we must be putting something into the blood and or pulling something out of the blood. I hope that's where your brain goes every time you see a capillary network. This, again, basically the name of the game in 16 weeks of advanced A&P is discussing what's going on at the capillary network and the cells and tissues of your body. So, capillary networks, we're dropping stuff off, picking stuff up. But I thought we already did that up here. We did, right? We dropped some stuff off, drop some plasma and some other stuff, and maybe, I don't know, we maybe picked a few things up, but definitely dropped stuff off. Well, what are we doing here with the peritubular capillaries? We're dropping stuff and dropping out stuff off, picking stuff up. So we have two more methods of urine formation as well as blood fluid balance. Okay, fluid balance, fluid maintenance. So this next section of the nephron, called the tubular section, is going to start where that glomerular capsule ends. So this little spot up here by the red dot, okay, that's the beginning of the tubular network. Okay, so step one is we filtered some stuff out of the plasma. All right, so and now we have a filtrate forming. We have stuff inside of this tube. Okay, so notice this tube is kind of curvy. We say it's convoluted. Okay? Convoluted, specifically we call it the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember, proximal means in proximity of or close to. For this particular term, or this particular structure, proximal convoluted tubule, the proximal relates to its relative location with the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. So the closest tube to the capsule is called the proximal tube or proximal tubule. Okay, so the first section of the tubular network is called the proximal convoluted tubule. And you'll notice, again, we've got some capillary action going on here. Okay, so we have, I'll come back to that. So we'll stay in the tube and then we'll come back around for a second. Okay, so proximal convoluted tubule. Now notice it kind of starts descending. It's going down. So we say this is the descending limb of the loop. Okay, so this is the descending limb. So this next section is called the loop of Henle. Okay, the loop of Henle. So we go, by the way, proximal convoluted tubule is abbreviated PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. So the PCT becomes the loop of Henle. Okay, and the loop of Henle has a descending loop and an ascending loop. And again, notice a lot of capillary action going on there, or capillary activity, capillary presence. Okay, and then we ascend the loop of Henle, and then notice we start getting convoluted again, kind of curvy tube, but we're a distance from the glomerular capsule. So we call this the distal convoluted tubule or the DCT. It's the distal convoluted tubule. Notice again, it's kind of wrapped up and part of the efferent arterial system. That plays a role here in a few minutes I'll talk about. And then it continues on and finally dumps into what we call the collecting duct. Okay, so the end of the line for the nephron is going to be this collecting duct. So the nephron, in essence, begins at this afferent arteriole into the glomerulus and ends with the distal convoluted tubule dumping into the collecting duct. Okay, and then, of course, that takes us into the renal pyramids, right? And then the calyx, the minor calyx. Now, there are two things going on that I didn't mention that have to do with this tubular network or this tubular portion of the nephron. Again, we mentioned that it's full of capillaries, so there must be something going on here. So we're going to see something called reabsorption. So the first thing we do with blood is we filter it. The second thing we can do is reabsorb some of the items that got into this tubular network here. So we're basically forming urine, right? Well, some of the items that got pushed out or filtered, we may want to bring them back into the bloodstream, right? Maybe there's, water for one. Maybe we need to pull some water back, maybe some sodium chloride ions. Maybe there are some items, some buffering agents, some bicarbonate ion. But there might be some, my point is, we're going to filter through, but some of the items that got through into the tubular network, some of those items we may not have wanted filtered. We may want them back into the bloodstream. So reabsorption, go back into reabsorption. Okay, that's what's going on really throughout this tubular network. Okay, we could see reabsorption of something potentially all the way to the end of the line over here, right here in this spot. Okay, so we may be able to reabsorb right to the end. Maybe there's still something in the filtrate. Okay? There's still something in this tubular system that doesn't need to be in there. We want to hang on to it. We want it put back into the blood so that we can pull it right out at the very end. Okay, so reabsorption, that's the second function, I guess you could say, that the nephrons are doing. Filtration first at the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. Okay. Reabsorption second. Okay. Now, what if there was some stuff in the bloodstream that I wasn't able to get out up here? So maybe, I drop a bunch of stuff off. I'm filtering what I can, and blood leaves, goes into this efferent system and kind of dipsy doodles down. Maybe and notice we're at the distal aspect of the tubular system. There might be some stuff that maybe we really want to get out of the blood, but we were unable to up here in the glomerular capsule. So we call that secretion. So we can also secrete what's still in the blood that maybe didn't get filtered. And a lot of that secretion is going to happen. It can happen in the proximal and kind of the descending area in the loop of Henle, certainly. We see a lot of it going on more or less kind of toward the end of the line. So the ascending loop into that distal convoluted tubule, that's where we're going to see quite a bit of, potentially quite a bit of secretion going on. So again, first thing we do is filter the blood in the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. Blood's going to leave that glomerular capsule, and urine is going to start being formed in the tubular network. Okay. So at this point, I could either pull some stuff out of the urine that needs to go back into the blood, or I can take stuff out of the blood that needs to go into the urine that didn't get filtered up here. Okay. So filtration and reabsorption and secretion. Filtration, reabsorption, secretion. So filtration puts things into the tubule. Secretion puts things into the tubule. So filtration and secretion take things from blood and put them into the nephron, into the urine tubules. Okay. Whereas reabsorption takes things out of the urine tubular system and puts it back into the cardiovascular or blood system. That's the long and short of it, really. Like I said, we spent a good 2 weeks really breaking down this nephron and each of these stops along the way, and what exactly is being filtered, what should be filtered, what should be reabsorbed, and what should be secreted, and under what circumstances. Okay, during a stress situation, filtration, secretion, reabsorption are going to be different than when I'm sleeping or than when I'm relaxed and awake. So my point is, these things can change, but the fact of the matter is we're able to make sure that our kidneys are able to make sure that we try to maintain fluid balance. We try to maintain what we call electrolyte balance. Electrolytes are charged particles, those ions. Okay? Sodium, magnesium, chlorine or chloride ions, potassium, zinc. Okay? So electrolyte balance, fluid balance. We can also regulate pH a little bit with the kidneys. So remember, cardiovascular and respiratory, keep blood moving, keep oxygen, carbon dioxide going. Kidneys are going to help with some of the filtration, some of the cleansing and cleaning of the blood, but we're also going to help with some of the pH balancing. Remember, respiratory primarily does the exhaling of carbon dioxide to help with pH balance. Okay. Respiratory, number one for pH balance. Kidneys and the urinary system assist. Okay. So they're kind of the secondary helper, the assistant for pH balance, and they actually regulate hydrogen ion concentration. So yeah, that's a lot of physiology stuff. So we're going to break it down in a lot more detail. But again, you do need to know what we're talking about. So next semester, when we get to right away, we start talking about filtration and what is filtration, just on a general, biological level of transportation of substances. Filtration is one of those transportation mechanisms. We're going to be looking right at this. Okay. Later in the semester, next semester, we spend time just on fluid, electrolyte, and pH balance. That's going to be a lot more of this. So hopefully it's not and of course I'll go back through and discuss and debrief you a little bit and remind you of these anatomical spots. Okay. I'm not going to spend an hour and a half on it. Okay, that's what you're getting now. I'll spend maybe 10 minutes going through this and reminding you of the basics of a nephron and these three filtration, reabsorption, secretion processes that take place. Okay, and then we'll just go deeper and deeper into it. Okay. Other than that, I think as far as urinary goes, that's really the name of the game. That's really all I wanted to introduce you to. The four main structures: the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. And then I wanted to introduce you to kind of the gross anatomy of the kidney in its section. So looking at the cortex and the medulla, and then we looked at the pyramids and the calyces and the renal pelvis. Okay. And the renal columns. Then we looked a little bit at the vascularization of the kidney. A couple new terms in there: the segmental, the lobar, the lobular, the arcuate, and the interlobular. Okay, so we looked at some of those. And then we touched on a little bit of the structural aspects of the accessories. So the ureters, bladder, and urethra. Okay. And then lastly, we went through some of the new terms associated with a nephron. You have the afferent arteriole dumping into the glomerulus. Okay. And then the Bowman's capsule surrounding that glomerulus. And then the efferent arteriole leaving the glomerulus. Okay. And then as we continue the nephron and the tubular aspect, we go into the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, descend toward the loop of Henle, then ascend up toward the distal convoluted tubule, and then head over to a collecting duct. Okay, so, and of course, we had those paratubular capillaries as well. There's one other item I just wanted to, again, we spend a lot of time on this next semester, but we have that afferent arteriole coming in, efferent arteriole going out. We have that distal convoluted tubule. Let me go back to our original. We have that distal convoluted tubule kind of sitting here. So this is showing afferent in, efferent out, distal convoluted tubule. This right here is kind of what remember I said this is kind of our last stop for either putting something back into the blood that we didn't want to get rid of, or putting something in from taking something from the blood and putting it into the urine system that we meant to get rid of. So that's what this is called, the pardon me, it's a mouthful, juxtaglomerular apparatus. Again, kind of a side note, it is of structural importance because again, we see the afferent and efferent, and we see that distal convoluted tubule all kind of jumbled together before we dump into the collecting duct. So again, we can potentially put stuff right back into the bloodstream right here. We can pull stuff out of the bloodstream if we need to. So we can reabsorb, we can secrete. And of course, this is where our filtration is occurring inside the Bowman's capsule. So anyway, pretty amazing how this works. And again, we'll look at shouldn't say it's pretty amazing how it works yet, because we haven't really looked at how it works. Pretty amazing how it's structured, right? Again, we are seeing a lot more kidney disease and kidney disorders in the U.S. We see usually hypertension and chronic high blood pressure lead to problems with the glomerulus and with the kidney, as this afferent arteriole is bringing blood in. If I have high blood pressure, chronic high blood pressure, that's going to be putting strains on these walls of the glomerulus. We could even get to the point, depending on what's going on and the level of stress and how long it's been going on, we can actually even start to see some of these fenestrations, or these little windows or pores, get larger. And next thing you know, we're seeing glucose eliminated, we're seeing albumin, we're seeing plasma proteins, immunoglobulins, and immunoglobulins being dumped. I mean, so yeah, kidneys are a big deal, and so if they're not functioning, dialysis is the option that many people seek out. And so we are seeing high numbers of dialysis clinics and dialysis needs and patients over the last probably 15 to 20 years. It's been steadily increasing. So what that tells us is, we're dealing with a lot of patients that have a lot of stress, that do a lot of damage to their body. They have a lot of pH issues. They have hydration issues. We know alcohol is a big deal. We know that a lot of the pharmaceuticals that folks are taking are full of different types of sodiums, and our diet's certainly full of sugars, and leading to type 2 diabetes, leading to kidney issues. So my point is, the kidneys really do a lot of great work for us, and we really put them through a lot of strain and stress. And when we talk about physiology and homeostasis and the maintaining balance and that sympathetic parasympathetic stuff, man, you guys, next semester that you're going to see the kidneys really play a role in so much of maintaining these levels. And when these levels aren't maintained, the kidneys really try to work it, and they suffer, right? They work harder to try to accommodate the needs of the body. And if the needs are, extreme, the kidneys will work extremely hard to meet those needs, and usually they end up burning out. So that's it. That's my introduction to the urinary system for you guys. Again, we spend quite a bit of time on it next semester. I encourage you to keep working on your Padlets, keep working on your unit assignments, and prepping for your exams. Thursday, we're going to wrap everything up with the reproductive system. We'll talk a little bit about the birds and the bees and some of the basic structural features of the male and female reproductive systems. Next semester, we spend a little time on genetics and heredity and some of the actual features of meiosis and fertilization and implantation. And so we won't really get into that too much this semester. So Thursday is really just going to be a lot of just structural talk, which, you probably know your parts, but we'll go through them anyway, because, It's just what we have to do. We can't go through the human anatomy and physiology and all the body systems without the system that perpetuates life, right? Without the reproductive system, none of us would be here. So it is, however, the only system in the body that you could completely remove, and the body would show certainly some signs of change, but functionally and physically speaking, yeah, the person would probably be okay. I mean, we can't necessarily remove the respiratory system or the digestive system or any other, certainly not the nervous or cardiovascular. But the reproductive system does get removed. We see, especially with menopausal women, getting hysterectomies, removing the ovaries, the uterus. eh, so, but anyway, and they live long lives and healthy lives even after a hysterectomy. We do see males getting vasectomies, and again, living healthy lives after the fact. So, but that's it. You guys have a warm Tuesday and Wednesday, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.